안녕하세요. I want to thank the organizers and the PSF for hosting PyCon Asia Pacific in Seoul this year. My name is Hyunjin Han, and I'm one of the main developers of Cross Compute, which is a package on PyPy that you can pip install, and it'll convert your script into a web app. So today I'm going to be talking about Python debugging tips. All of these slides are available on GitHub at that link. That's bit.ly/pdb tips. Okay. So I'm going to discuss 8 use cases for debugging, and split into 3 categories: when you're building your prototype, when you're building the development version, and the production version. Okay, so when you're developing your prototype, the first demo that I'm going to show is when you run an interpreter. Okay, so who here has heard of Jupyter Notebook? Yeah, well, Jupyter Notebook has something interesting called debug. So let's see a demo of this right now. Okay. We're going to activate the virtual environment, and then install Jupyter, install ipython. Okay. So now we're going to start the Jupyter Notebook, and I'm going to show you some debug feature, which not many people know about. Okay, so we're going to define a function that divides by x, and we're going to make it raise an exception. So this will raise an exception. Okay, so we got an exception, but then we'll run debug. And when we run debug, it drops us at that part into the ipdb debugger. And then you can examine your variables and stuff like this. Okay, so who knew about this? So this is, if you want, when you're developing your prototype, I highly recommend using Jupyter Notebook. The next thing that we'll show is ipython embed. So this, wherever you want to examine the variables in your program at that part, just copy and paste this line, assuming that you have ipython installed, and you'll be able to see using the whos command. So the whos command is very interesting. In this demo, so this is a simple script. It adds 2 numbers. So it takes 2 command line input arguments, A and B, converts them into integers and adds them. And we're going to insert ipython embed right inside the function. Okay, and then when we run the command and type whos will tell us which WHOS will tell us what variables we can see in our scope. So this is a command that not many people know about, but has been very useful when I debug my programs. Okay, so now on to the third scenario. Okay, so in the third scenario, we're going to use a package. Before we covered Jupyter, we covered ipython. Now we introduce something called PUDB. So PUDB was made by the creator of PyCUDA, Andreas Klockner, and he still maintains it very well. Everything that I'm introducing here is a very well-maintained package. And PUDB is very nice. And if you remember back in the 80s, there was a company called Borland, and they had made something called Borland C++, which also had Borland Turbo Debugger. Well, PUDB is a lot like Turbo Debugger. So this is great because it brings back the 80s. Okay, so we've installed PUDB. And this is the same script from before. It adds 2 numbers. And instead of ipython embed, we'll set trace on PUDB. So we just inserted that line. And now when we run, it drops us into the PUDB interface, which is very nice. On the upper right, you have a watch list that you, every time we step through by pressing N, you can see what variables are visible, and you can, so this is, you can set breakpoints as a amazing console debugger. Okay, so we talked about PUDB. Yeah, and on the bottom you can do ipython stuff. Okay. So I use PUDB a lot. Everything I'm showing is stuff that I use a lot. Once you've already developed your script, then you have different options. In case you don't want to modify the script, you can just run this command, PUDB -- your script and whatever arguments that follow. And the -- you only need it if you have command line arguments for your script. And this is great because, as we'll see, running this command will drop you into the PUDB debugger immediately. So see, it starts at the beginning. We didn't have to add any statements, and we can type C to run the whole program or step through it with N, and just like before. So this is another option you can use when you've already written your script and you just want to step through and understand how, or remember what you wrote. Okay, so now this is another relatively new feature of PUDB, which is when you press Control C, it'll drop into the debugger. So this is when you want to, let's say you have some tornado event loop and you want to drop into the debugger. So in this example, we'll have a continuous while loop. So you see it's while true. It's kind of hard to see here, but let me, yeah, so when it runs this, it loops continuously, and we're going to insert at the top something that listens for Control C. And this is just, what you just saw was the Jedi plugin for autocomplete. Okay, so now when you run this script, so it was running, we pressed Control C and it dropped us right where when we press Control C. So this is a different way to enter the debugger. And don't worry, I'll have a summary table at the end. Okay, so we just covered tracing when you press Control C. However, it's another matter entirely if you have a multi-threaded application, because it's hard to launch a debugger in the main process. So or if you have a Docker container, so because you can't directly access it. So there's another new package called WDB, and it's pretty interesting. So it has the same syntax. You just drop this line, and this introduces remote debugging. Remote debugging has been around for a while, and is it running? Yeah. So let me just check that it's playing. Okay, so I'm waiting for here, let me restart the video. Okay, so debugging has been around for a while. Oops. Okay. Okay, so right now we're talking about Okay, so we skipped to the multi-threaded container part. So now this is interesting. Oh, here we are. Okay, so this one you just install. Oh, I guess the video is not working here. So I'll just play this manually. Okay, so we're installing WDB. So this is a simple threaded application. So you'll see it'll start 3 workers. And we're going to import WDB. Okay, so now when we run this script, first we have to, I don't know if you see at the top, but first we have to start the WDB server, and then it'll launch, you see at the top, it launches 3 threads, 3 individual, here, let me show this one more time, because this is a very interesting, okay, so we'll try this one again. So we're installing WDB. And the reason I restarted this is because there's something important at the top. You need to launch the background process, the WDB server. Okay, so this is, you need to launch this, and everything happens on your local host. And then when you do it, you see it started 3 separate debugger sessions at the top, 1 for each time you launched it inside your thread. So you can see X over here. Oops. Let me just, so you can see X over here was 1, 2, and 3 for each of the instances of the thread. Okay. So let's go back into okay. Then once your system is already in production, it's very important to keep logs of everything. And actually, I recommend using rsyslog, which is a standard package for most Linux systems. And you should have a namespace logger. So let's just show that right now. Okay, so here's an example of so now we're just talking about the logging package, which you should know. At the top you have a package that we're calling XYZ, and at the bottom imports the XYZ function and calls something in it. So first, when you run it, it shows nothing. And then just with the basic configuration, it'll show the different warning levels. However, since we set the logger to the debugging level, then we can select what amount of information we want to see. So this is if on a single server setup, but when you want to have multiple processes and many servers, then I recommend using rsyslog, which you can set on a separate machine and have all of your processes send logging messages to the rsyslog. So this is good for microservices. And the last important thing is, so let's say you already have tests and you want to and your tests fail. Well, if you use PyTest, the only package that's easily compatible with PyTest is pdpp, which is an improvement on PDB. it adds some other things, because you can't use ipdb directly. So we just installed pdb pp, and we're going to run these tests on this package, which has some errors. And we ran it with pytest pdb, and when there's an error, it drops us into the prompt, and then we can do our typical debugging stuff. Okay, so to summarize, here is the main summary, and once again you can see all of these sides at the link, and that's all. Thank you.